All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the powerful financial system that top executives use to make those massive, high-stakes decisions, navigate all kinds of uncertainty, and ultimately drive value.
I mean, you have to wonder, right? When a company makes a billion-dollar move, maybe they're buying another company or launching a crazy new product line, what is really going on in that room? Is it just a gut feeling, a lucky guess?
Well, here's the secret. Nope. The best leaders, they aren't just guessing. They're actually operating inside a really structured, disciplined system. So in this explainer, we're going to build that system together, piece by piece, and create a kind of strategic toolkit to help you see how these critical decisions are really made.
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at how leaders peer into the future. Then, we'll bring it back to the present and get a real handle on costs. After that, we'll explore a pretty radical way to rethink spending entirely. And then, at the end, we'll see how all these pieces click together into one super powerful system.
First up, forecasting enterprise value. This is all about looking ahead. Think of it like this. It's the difference between taking one single snapshot of your business versus creating a full-on movie of all its possible futures.
And the main tool for this, the real workhorse, is something called discounted cash flow, or DCF. To put it simply, it's just a way to figure out what a business's future earnings are actually worth in today's money. This calculation really becomes the analytical backbone of any serious strategy. And this is why it's such a game changer. Using DCF, leaders can model all these different scenarios. What if growth slows? What if our costs suddenly spike? It lets them pressure test their biggest bets before they make them, giving them the hard data they need to back up that strategic vision.
You can see the evolution right here. A basic forecast? That's just a single, fixed guess. But what the top executives do is elevate this to scenario modeling. They build these dynamic models so they can prepare for volatility by asking, what if, over and over and over again. It's all about preparing for multiple futures, not just trying to predict one.
Okay, let's move on to our next tool and see how this all starts to connect. So, after looking into the future, we need to get a really firm grip on the present. And that brings us to establishing cost discipline. Because, as the saying goes, you just can't manage what you don't measure.
So, the very first step is creating what's called a cost baseline. And it's pretty much what it sounds like. It's a super clear, detailed, all-encompassing map of every single dollar the company is spending right now. This thing is the foundational reference point for literally everything that comes next.
So why is this so critical? Well, once you have a baseline, you can finally spot where the waste is. You can benchmark yourself against your competitors. You can actually track if your cost-saving ideas are working. It's what makes accountability even possible. And this quote highlights a massive strategic shift. Without that baseline, you're just putting out fires. You're playing defense. But with it, you can go on offense. You can proactively manage your resources, measure your progress, and actually hold teams accountable for their spending.
Okay, on to the third tool in our kit, and honestly, this one's the most transformative. This is about way more than just trimming a few costs here and there. It's about a complete reimagination of spending, right from the ground up.
It's called zero-based design. And instead of taking last year's budget and just adding or subtracting a few percent, you start from a completely blank slate. You literally begin with a budget of zero and have to justify every single expense. The difference really comes down to the question you're asking. Traditional budgeting just asks, hey, what's a little different from last year? Zero-based design asks a much harder question. What is truly absolutely necessary for us to win, and how do we fund that? It forces you to challenge every single old habit and assumption. The process itself forces this radical focus. You start with nothing. You question everything you've always done just because, well, that's how it's always been done. You have to tie every dollar you spend directly to a strategic goal. And the result? You often uncover huge inefficiencies and free up a ton of resources that can be put to work on what really matters, growth and innovation.
And that brings us to our final section, putting it all together. We've looked at forecasting the future, we've looked at disciplining the present. Now let's see how they combine to create a real, tangible strategic advantage.
And here is probably the most important takeaway of all. These are not separate exercises you do once a year. Forecasting value, building a cost baseline, and rebuilding from zero, they're all integrated. They continuously feed into and strengthen each other. So there it is, the complete executive toolkit.
You use DCF and scenario modeling to look forward with foresight. You use cost baselining to establish control and discipline, and you use zero-based design to strategically free up your resources and put them exactly where they need to go, with precision.
At the end of the day, a top executive's job is really to be a storyteller. They have to orchestrate all of these tools to build a coherent, compelling narrative for their board, for their investors, and for their own employees. A story that shows not only how the company is going to create value, but also how it's going to be a wise steward of its resources.
And that leaves us with one final thought. And it doesn't matter if you're running a small team or a huge multinational corporation. Your strategy has a price tag, not just in money, but in focus and resources. The real question is, do you truly know what it is?